I'm Savannah Blake, 28 years old, and today I watched my own parents try to steal everything I'd built. As I sat in that sterile courtroom, listening to their lawyer demand half my seven-figure business empire, I never imagined the words that would come out of my mouth next. The judge went pale. My mother's face crumpled. My father actually stumbled backward. Because what I revealed wasn't just about money. It was about a family secret so devastating, it would destroy everything they thought they knew about blood, loyalty, and the daughter they were trying to rob. Before we dive into this family betrayal that'll make your jaw drop, tell me, where are you watching from? Hit that like button if you're ready for some serious family drama, and don't forget to subscribe because this story has more twists than a pretzel factory. Trust me, you won't see this ending coming. 6 months earlier, I was living what I thought was the American dream. My tech consulting firm, Digital Horizons, had just landed our biggest client, a Fortune 500 company that needed their entire infrastructure overhauled. The contract was worth $3.2 million, and suddenly, at 28, I was swimming in success I'd never imagined possible. I'd started the company fresh out of college with nothing but student loans and a laptop held together with electrical tape. While my friends were partying and figuring out their lives, I was pulling 18-hour days, learning coding languages, networking like my life depended on it. My parents, Margaret and Robert Blake, had always been supportive in their own distant way. They'd nod approvingly when I updated them on my progress during our monthly family dinners, but I could tell they never really understood what I did for a living. Computers, my mother would say vaguely when friends asked about my career. Savannah fixes computers. It was so much more than that, but I'd stopped trying to explain after the 100th glazed-over expression. What mattered was that I was finally financially stable, finally able to breathe without checking my bank account twice daily. That's when the requests started. First, it was my mother calling about their mortgage. "Honey, your father's hours got cut at the plant again. We're just a little behind this month. Could you spot us $3,000? We'll pay you back as soon as things turn around." 3,000 became 5,000. 5 became 8. By the fourth month, they'd borrowed $47,000 from me, always with promises of repayment that never materialized. But they were my parents. Family helps family, right? Then came the bombshell. "Savannah, sweetheart, we need to talk." My mother's voice was different during that phone call, nervous, almost guilty. "Your father and I have been discussing our retirement, and we think it would be wonderful if you could help us purchase a little vacation home in Florida. Nothing fancy, just a small place where we can spend our golden years." The small place turned out to be a waterfront property worth $600,000. They wanted me to co-sign the mortgage and put down the entire 20% deposit. "I don't understand," I said, staring at the real estate listing they'd emailed me. "This is way beyond what you need for retirement. And honestly, Mom, I don't think I'm comfortable putting my credit and finances on the line for something this big." The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees instantly. "After everything we've done for you," my father said, his voice taking on that sharp edge I remembered from childhood disagreements. "We raised you, fed you, put a roof over your head for 18 years. Now that you're successful, you can't help your own parents? I've already lent you almost $50,000. Lent." My mother's laugh was bitter. "Honey, that wasn't a loan. That was you finally giving back to the people who sacrificed everything for your ungrateful behind." The word ungrateful hit like a physical blow. But it was the look in their eyes that really scared me, this cold calculation, like they were sizing up an asset rather than talking to their daughter. That night, I couldn't sleep. Something felt fundamentally wrong about the whole situation, beyond just the money. There was an edge to their desperation that didn't make sense. My father still had his job, reduced hours or not. My mother had always been frugal to a fault. Where was this sudden need for luxury coming from? I decided to do what any good consultant does when faced with inconsistent data. I investigated. It started innocently enough. I offered to help them with their finances, maybe set up a better budget or find ways to increase their income. Let me take a look at your expenses, I suggested during Sunday dinner. Maybe I can spot some areas where you're overspending. My mother's fork clattered against her plate. That's not necessary, dear. We manage our money just fine. But if you need $600,000 for a house, plus all the money I've already given you. We said we manage just fine. My father's voice carried a warning. But I was already suspicious, and their defensiveness only confirmed my instincts. The next week, I hired a private investigator. I know how that sounds, who investigates their own parents? But something was seriously wrong, and I needed to know what I was really dealing with. The report arrived 3 days later, and it shattered my entire understanding of my family. My parents weren't struggling financially. They were thriving. Over the past 2 years, they'd quietly sold off property I didn't even know they owned, including a rental house that had been in my father's family for decades and a small commercial building downtown. The total from those sales? Nearly $400,000. But that wasn't the worst part. They'd also taken out a massive life insurance policy on me 18 months ago, right around the time my business started taking off. $2 million, with them as the sole beneficiaries. I stared at that document for hours, reading it over and over, hoping I'd misunderstood something. But there it was in black and white. My parents had bet $2 million on my death. The insurance required annual medical checkups, which explained why they'd suddenly become so concerned about my health, constantly suggesting I see doctors for minor issues, pushing me to get just a routine physical every few months. My hands shook as I reached for my phone. I needed to confront them immediately, but as I started dialing, another horrifying thought occurred to me. What if they weren't content to wait for natural causes? The borrowing, the demands for co-signing massive loans, the insurance policy, it wasn't about supporting their retirement. They were systematically positioning themselves to benefit from my success, whether I was alive or dead. In fact, given the insurance payout versus what they could squeeze from me while living, I was worth more to them deceased. That night, I changed every lock on my house, installed a security system, and started documenting everything. If my own parents were planning to destroy me financially or worse, I needed to be ready for war. I just never imagined that war would end up in a courtroom, with me holding the nuclear option that would obliterate not just their plans, but everything they thought they knew about our family. The next morning, I woke up with the kind of clarity that only comes from having your entire world flipped upside down. The parents I'd loved and trusted my entire life weren't who I thought they were. They were predators, and I was their prey. But here's the thing about being a successful entrepreneur. You don't get there by folding under pressure. You get there by turning problems into opportunities, by finding leverage where others see defeat. I spent the next week in full investigation mode, treating my family like a hostile business acquisition. If they wanted to play games with my life and finances, I needed to understand every rule, every player, and every possible outcome. The private investigator I'd hired, Marcus Chin, was a former police detective who specialized in financial crimes. When I called him back with additional requests, his voice carried a mix of professional interest and personal concern. Savannah, I have to ask, are you safe? What your parents have done, it's not just morally questionable, it's potentially criminal. Taking out life insurance on someone without their explicit knowledge can constitute fraud, depending on how they obtained the medical information. That was my first ray of hope in days. What do you mean? Well, they had to provide health information to get the policy approved. If they forged your signature on medical release forms or lied about having your consent, that's insurance fraud. And if they used any of the money you gave them as loan payments on property they were planning to sell anyway, that could be argued as fraud by deception. I authorized Marcus to dig deeper, and what he found over the next 72 hours was a masterclass in calculated deception. My parents had been planning this scheme for over 2 years, starting right around the time my business began showing serious potential. The rental property and commercial building they'd sold? They'd used my borrowed money to make improvements that increased the sale value, essentially using my cash to flip properties for their own profit. But the most damning discovery was a series of text messages Marcus retrieved from my father's old phone, which he'd traded in but forgotten to properly wipe. "She's getting too successful too fast," my father had texted my mother. "We need to move before she gets smart about protecting her assets." My mother's response made my stomach turn. "The insurance policy is our safety net. Either way, we come out ahead. If she keeps making money, we squeeze harder. If something happens to her, we're set for life. Something happens to her." Like I was a stock option they were hedging. The most chilling exchange was from just 3 weeks earlier. "She's getting suspicious about the house. Maybe we should accelerate the timeline." "What are you suggesting?" my mother had replied. "Nothing direct. But people have accidents all the time. Especially people who work too hard and don't pay attention to their surroundings." I screenshot everything, backed it up to 3 different cloud services, and sent copies to Marcus. Then I sat in my home office, staring at my computer screen, trying to process the fact that my parents were casually discussing scenarios where I might die. That's when the rage kicked in. Not the hot, explosive kind of anger that makes you do stupid things. This was cold, calculating fury, the kind that builds strategies and executes plans with surgical precision. They wanted to play financial games? Fine. I'd been playing those games professionally for years, and I was much better at them than they realized. My first move was defensive. I immediately revoked any and all financial access my parents had to my life. Emergency contact removed from bank accounts, beneficiaries updated on all my policies, power of attorney documents destroyed and replaced with new ones naming my business attorney instead. Then I got proactive. I researched the property sales they'd made using my money. Turns out, when you use someone else's funds to improve property without their knowledge and then sell that property for profit, it creates something called unjust enrichment liability. They legally owed me not just the money I'd given them, but a percentage of the profits they'd made using my capital. Better yet, the life insurance policy they'd taken out was indeed fraudulent. They'd forged my signature on the medical release forms and lied about having my permission. I filed a complaint with the Insurance Commission and the State Attorney General's office. But I wasn't done. Not even close. See, my parents had made one crucial error in their planning. They'd underestimated exactly how successful my business had become. That Fortune 500 contract was just the beginning. In the past month alone, I'd signed 3 more major deals, acquired a smaller competing firm, and been approached by investors interested in buying my company for a sum that would set me up for life. They were fighting over scraps while sitting on a gold mine they didn't even know existed. The irony was delicious, but it also gave me the leverage I needed for the nuclear option. During this investigation, I'd also learned something about my parents that they'd hidden from me my entire life. Something that would change not just our family dynamic, but their entire understanding of who they really were. See, when you hire a really good private investigator to look into someone's finances, you end up learning about a lot more than just money. You learn about their history, their relationships, their secrets. And my parents had been keeping a secret for 28 years. A secret that made their entire claim to my loyalty and financial support not just morally bankrupt, but legally questionable. I spent 3 sleepless nights deciding whether to use this information. It felt like holding a loaded weapon. Once I fired it, there would be no going back, no repairing our relationship, no pretending we were a normal family. But then I remembered my mother's text about something happening to me and my father's casual discussion of my accident, and I realized they'd already fired first. They'd declared war on their own daughter. Now they were going to learn what happens when you underestimate your opponent. The call came on a Tuesday morning. My mother's voice was falsely sweet, with an undertone of steel I now recognized as her manipulation voice. "Savannah, honey, we need to talk. Your father and I have decided that if you're not willing to help family voluntarily, we'll have to explore other options." "What kind of other options?" "Legal ones. We consulted with an attorney, and apparently, Children have a legal obligation to support their parents in certain circumstances. We're prepared to file a lawsuit to compel you to provide reasonable financial assistance." I almost laughed out loud. After everything I discovered, they were actually threatening to take me to court. "You know what, Mom? I think that's a great idea. Let's absolutely let a judge decide what I owe you." The confidence in her voice faltered slightly. "Well, we were hoping to avoid the unpleasantness of litigation." "No, I'm serious. File your lawsuit. I'll see you in court." She was quiet for a long moment. "Savannah, are you sure you want to go down this road? Family disputes can get very ugly very quickly." "Trust me," I said, thinking about the folder of evidence sitting on my desk. "You have no idea how ugly this is about to get." They filed the lawsuit 3 weeks later, and I have to admit, their attorney had done his homework. The complaint was professionally crafted, painting me as a cold-hearted daughter who'd abandoned her struggling parents despite having the means to help them. According to their version of events, I was a millionaire tech mogul who refused to provide basic support to the two people who'd sacrificed everything to raise me. They were seeking ongoing financial support, reimbursement for my childhood expenses with interest, and compensation for their emotional distress caused by my abandonment. The dollar amount they were requesting made my jaw drop: $1.2 million, plus ongoing monthly support of $8,000. Reading through their complaint felt surreal. They'd crafted this narrative where I was simultaneously successful enough to afford their demands, but heartless enough to deny basic necessities to my elderly parents. They painted themselves as victims of their ungrateful child's newfound wealth. What they didn't know was that I'd been preparing for this exact moment for months. My attorney, Rebecca Morrison, was a fierce family law specialist who'd seen every variation of financial manipulation between relatives. When I first brought her the evidence I'd gathered, her reaction was immediate and visceral. "This is one of the most calculated schemes I've ever seen," she said, flipping through the documentation. "The life insurance fraud alone is enough to get them charged criminally. But Savannah, what you've discovered about your family history, are you absolutely certain you want to use that information?" The family history she was referring to was the nuclear bomb I'd been sitting on for months. During his investigation, Marcus had uncovered something that my parents had hidden from me for my entire life, something that fundamentally changed the legal and emotional dynamics of their lawsuit. I wasn't actually their biological daughter. The records were buried deep, but they were there. Adoption papers filed when I was 6 months old, sealed by court order, but accessible to a determined investigator with the right connections. My birth parents had died in a car accident, and Margaret and Robert Blake had adopted me through a private arrangement with minimal legal oversight. But here's where it gets interesting: they'd received significant financial compensation for taking me in. My biological parents had life insurance policies that provided for my care, plus a trust fund that was supposed to be used for my education and well-being until I turned 25. That trust fund, which should have contained nearly $300,000 by the time I reached adulthood, had been completely drained by my adoptive parents over the years. They'd used my own inheritance money to raise me, then convinced me I owed them gratitude for their sacrifices. They weren't just trying to steal my future wealth, they'd already stolen my past. Rebecca and I spent weeks crafting our counter-strategy. We wouldn't just defend against their lawsuit. We'd obliterate their credibility and expose the full scope of their deception. But first, I needed to handle the emotional aftermath of learning my entire life had been built on lies. The revelation that I was adopted wasn't necessarily devastating. Plenty of people have loving relationships with adoptive parents. What destroyed me was understanding that Margaret and Robert had never seen me as their daughter. I'd always been an investment to them, a source of income they could manage and eventually exploit. Every childhood memory took on a sinister new context. Their pride in my academic achievements wasn't parental love, it was satisfaction watching their investment grow. Their encouragement of my entrepreneurial ambitions wasn't supportive parenting, it was cultivating a future revenue stream. I called in sick to work for 3 days and just sat in my apartment, crying and rage-eating ice cream while trying to process 28 years of emotional manipulation. That's when my best friend Elena showed up at my door with wine and tissues, ready to stage an intervention. Okay, I don't know what's happening, but you haven't answered your phone in 72 hours and your assistant says you're indisposed, she said, pushing past me into my living room. Are you having some kind of breakdown? Elena Martinez had been my anchor since college, brilliant, loyal, and blessed with the kind of emotional intelligence that could cut through any crisis. She was also a forensic accountant who specialized in financial crime, which meant she understood both the personal and professional implications of what my parents had done. When I finished explaining everything, Elena was quiet for a long time, processing the full scope of the betrayal. Jesus, Savannah. This isn't just family drama, this is organized crime with a genetic component. She set down her wine glass and looked at me seriously. What are you going to do? I'm going to destroy them in court. Good. But are you prepared for the collateral damage? This kind of revelation doesn't just hurt the perpetrators, it reshapes your entire understanding of yourself. That was the question I'd been avoiding. Who was I if everything I'd believed about my origins was false? What did it mean that my greatest achievements had been built on a foundation of lies? Elena, being Elena, helped me reframe the situation. Look at it this way, she said. Everything you've accomplished, you did despite their manipulation, not because of their support. They gave you money that was already yours, took credit for sacrifices they never made, and tried to steal your success. The fact that you built a multi-million-dollar business while being systematically deceived and exploited? That doesn't make your achievements less impressive, it makes them miraculous. She was right. And more importantly, she helped me understand that I wasn't just fighting for financial justice, I was fighting to reclaim my own narrative. Elena also provided crucial strategic support. As a forensic accountant, she could analyze the financial evidence with professional credibility, providing expert testimony that would demolish my parents' claims about their financial situation. We also brought in Dr. Sarah Chin, a psychologist who specialized in family manipulation and financial abuse. Dr. Chin would testify about the psychological patterns of parents who exploit their children financially, helping the court understand that this wasn't a simple family dispute, but a systematic abuse of trust and authority. The final member of our team was Marcus, the private investigator, whose testimony would establish the timeline and scope of my parents' deception. As we prepared for trial, I made a decision that surprised even my own legal team. I wanted this case to be public. No sealed records, no confidential settlement, no gag orders. If my parents wanted to drag me to court and paint me as an ungrateful daughter, then the public should hear the full truth about what kind of parents they really were. Rebecca warned me about the risks. Once this information is public, you can't control the narrative. Social media, local news, family friends. Everyone will have opinions about your situation. Good, I said. Let them judge based on facts instead of manipulation. 3 days before the trial, my parents' attorney reached out about a potential settlement. They were willing to drop the lawsuit in exchange for $100,000 and a confidentiality agreement. I counteroffered with my own settlement terms. They would publicly acknowledge their fraud, repay every penny they'd taken from me with interest, surrender any claim to my current or future assets, and submit to a psychological evaluation regarding their fitness to make financial decisions. Their response was immediate and predictable. Absolutely not. Fine, I told Rebecca. Let's go to trial. The night before we were due in court, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the moment when I would have to stand up and reveal everything. Not just the financial fraud, but the adoption secret that would shatter any remaining pretense of family loyalty. I thought about that scared little girl who'd grown up believing she owed her existence to 2 people who saw her as a commodity. I thought about the young woman who'd worked herself to exhaustion trying to prove she was worthy of their love. And I thought about the successful entrepreneur I'd become despite their sabotage, not because of their support. By morning, I knew exactly what I was going to say when the judge asked me to respond to their claims. The truth. All of it. No matter how much it hurt, no matter how completely it destroyed the illusion of family we'd been maintaining. It was time for Margaret and Robert Blake to learn that their investment had grown far beyond their ability to control or claim. And it was time for me to stop being their victim and start being their reckoning. The courtroom was smaller than I'd expected, but packed with more people than a typical family dispute would draw. Word had gotten out about the case, successful tech entrepreneur being sued by her own parents, and local media had picked up the story. My parents sat at the plaintiff's table with their attorney, looking every inch the sympathetic elderly couple being mistreated by their wealthy daughter. My mother had even worn her church dress, the one she saved for funerals and special occasions. They'd clearly prepared for this performance. Their attorney, James Patterson, was exactly what I'd expected, silver-haired, grandfatherly, with the kind of warm voice that made you want to trust him immediately. His opening statement was masterful, painting a picture of two hardworking parents who'd sacrificed everything for their ungrateful child. Your Honor, this case is about basic human decency, Patterson began. Margaret and Robert Blake raised their daughter from infancy, provided for her education, supported her dreams, and loved her unconditionally. Now that she's achieved extraordinary success, they're simply asking for reasonable assistance in their golden years. Instead, they've been met with cold rejection from the daughter they devoted their lives to raising. He went on for 20 minutes, detailing their modest requests, their financial struggles, and my apparent heartlessness in refusing to help. By the time he finished, I could see several people in the gallery looking at me with obvious disapproval. Then it was Rebecca's turn. Your Honor, this case is indeed about basic human decency, specifically, the complete lack of it demonstrated by the plaintiffs. Over the next several hours, we will prove that Margaret and Robert Blake are not struggling parents seeking reasonable assistance. They are sophisticated fraudsters who have spent years systematically deceiving, manipulating, and financially exploiting my client. This lawsuit isn't about family support, it's the final phase of a calculated scheme to steal everything their victim has built. Rebecca's opening was surgical, precise, and devastating. She outlined the life insurance fraud, the property schemes, the forged documents, and the text messages discussing my potential accidents. By the time she finished, the temperature in the room had shifted completely. Then came the evidence. Marcus testified first, walking the court through his investigation with professional detachment. Bank records, property sales, insurance documents, he laid out a timeline that showed systematic deception going back years. The defendants sold approximately $400,000 in property while simultaneously claiming financial hardship to their daughter, he explained. They used funds borrowed from the defendant to improve these properties, then sold them for significant profits without disclosure. Elena's testimony was even more damaging. As a forensic accountant, she'd analyzed every financial transaction between me and my parents, revealing a pattern of exploitation that went far beyond simple borrowing. The defendants treated their daughter like a personal bank, Elena testified. They borrowed money for supposed emergencies that didn't exist, used her funds to increase their own property values, and created artificial crises to justify repeated requests for financial assistance. But it was Dr. Chen's psychological testimony that really drove home the scope of the manipulation. This pattern of behavior is consistent with financial predators who target family members, she explained. The defendants used emotional manipulation, guilt, and false claims of emergency to systematically exploit their daughter's natural desire to help family. This isn't normal family financial stress, it's organized psychological abuse. Throughout all this testimony, I watched my parents' expressions change from confident to concerned to panicked. Their attorney objected frequently, but the evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. Then came the moment I'd been preparing for since this nightmare began. Ms. Blake, would you please tell the court about your relationship with the plaintiffs? Rebecca asked. I stood up slowly, looking directly at my parents for the first time since entering the courtroom. My mother's eyes were pleading, desperate. My father looked angry, like this was all somehow my fault. Your Honor, I need to correct something fundamental about this case, I began, my voice steady despite the earthquake happening in my chest. Margaret and Robert Blake have presented themselves as my devoted parents who sacrificed everything to raise me. That's not entirely accurate. The courtroom went completely silent. I discovered 6 months ago that I'm adopted. The Blakes took me in when I was 6 months old, after my biological parents died in a car accident. My mother's face went white. My father actually stood up before his attorney pulled him back down. Now, adoption itself isn't the issue, I continued. Many adopted children have loving relationships with their adoptive parents. The issue is that my biological parents left me a substantial inheritance. Nearly $300,000 in a trust fund specifically designated for my care and education. I could hear murmurs rippling through the gallery behind me. The Blakes drained that entire trust fund over the years, using my own inheritance money to raise me, then convinced me that I owed them gratitude for their financial sacrifices. They didn't sacrifice their money for my upbringing, they spent mine. Judge Williams, an elderly African-American woman with sharp eyes and no patience for nonsense, leaned forward. Ms. Blake, do you have documentation of this trust fund? Yes, Your Honor. Rebecca handed over the documents while I continued. But the financial fraud goes even deeper. 6 months ago, I discovered that the defendants had taken out a $2 million life insurance policy on me without my knowledge or consent, using forged signatures on medical release forms. Given their recent text messages discussing scenarios where something might happen to me, I believe this policy was taken out with the expectation of financial gain from my death. The judge's expression darkened considerably. Behind me, I could hear shocked whispers and someone's sharp intake of breath. Furthermore, I said, my voice getting stronger, every dollar they're claiming I owe them was money that belonged to me in the first place. They borrowed against funds they'd already stolen from my inheritance, then demanded repayment for raising me with my own money. This lawsuit isn't about family obligation, it's about covering up decades of financial abuse and fraud. My father finally exploded. That's a lie, he shouted, jumping to his feet. We gave you everything. We loved you like our own. Mr. Blake, sit down, Judge Williams ordered sharply. But I wasn't done. Your Honor, I want to address my father's claim about loving me like their own. I have here a series of text messages between the defendants, discussing their financial plans regarding my success. Rebecca handed me printed copies of the messages Marcus had recovered. These are direct quotes. She's getting too successful too fast. We need to move before she gets smart about protecting her assets. And this one, the insurance policy is our safety net. Either way, we come out ahead. If she keeps making money, we squeeze harder. If something happens to her, we're set for life. My mother was openly crying now, but I felt no sympathy. These weren't tears of remorse. They were tears of someone watching their scheme fall apart. And finally, Your Honor, this message from 3 weeks ago, she's getting suspicious about the house. Maybe we should accelerate the timeline. When my mother asked what he meant, my father responded, nothing direct. But people have accidents all the time, especially people who work too hard and don't pay attention to their surroundings. The courtroom erupted. Judge Williams banged her gavel repeatedly, calling for order, but the damage was done. My parents' attorney was frantically whispering to his clients, probably advising them about their Fifth Amendment rights. I looked directly at my parents one final time. They didn't raise me out of love, Your Honor. They raised me as an investment. And now that their investment has paid off beyond their wildest dreams, they want to collect dividends they never earned from a daughter they never truly loved. I sat down, my hands shaking slightly, but my voice had never wavered. The next few minutes were chaos as both attorneys approached the bench and my parents had what appeared to be a complete breakdown at their table. Judge Williams called a recess, but I knew the case was over. In the hallway, my mother tried to approach me, her makeup streaked with tears. Savannah, please, you don't understand. I understand perfectly, I said quietly. I understand that you've been lying to me for 28 years. I understand that you stole my inheritance and convinced me I owed you gratitude for spending it. I understand that you took out life insurance betting on my death. And I understand that when I started asking questions, you discussed having me killed. She reached for my arm, but I stepped back. We never meant, we wouldn't have actually. Save it for your criminal attorney, I said. Because after what just happened in there, you're going to need one. The trial resumed after a tower recess, but it was essentially over before Judge Williams even sat back down. My parents' attorney requested an immediate conference, and when they returned, his face looked like he'd aged a decade. Your Honor, my clients would like to withdraw their complaint and request a brief recess to discuss potential resolution of all claims between the parties. Judge Williams was having none of it. Mr. Patterson, given the serious allegations of fraud that have been raised in this courtroom, I'm not simply dismissing this case. I'm ordering a full investigation into the insurance fraud allegations, and I'm referring the matter of the drained trust fund to the district attorney's office for potential criminal charges. She turned to my parents, her voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. Mr. and Mrs. Blake, you are hereby ordered to have no contact with MS. Blake outside of court-supervised proceedings. Any attempt to contact her directly or through third parties will result in contempt of court charges. Furthermore, pending the outcome of the criminal investigation, all of your assets are frozen except for basic living expenses. My mother let out a sob that echoed through the courtroom. My father just sat there, staring at the table, finally understanding that his carefully planned scheme had backfired spectacularly. But Judge Williams wasn't finished. Additionally, I'm ordering immediate restitution for the drained trust fund. Based on the evidence presented, the principal amount plus 28 years of compound interest comes to approximately $650,000. You have 30 days to arrange payment. The number hit them like a physical blow. They'd stolen $300,000 from my inheritance, but with nearly 3 decades of compound interest, they now owed more than double what they'd taken. Your Honor, Patterson said weakly, my clients don't have access to that kind of money. Then they should have thought of that before committing fraud, Judge Williams replied coldly. Court is adjourned. As the gavel fell, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months, complete, overwhelming relief. It was over. Not just the lawsuit, but the years of manipulation, the guilt trips, the constant feeling that I owed them something I could never repay. Outside the courthouse, the scene was surreal. Local news crews had gathered, drawn by the dramatic nature of the case. My parents emerged looking destroyed, my mother clinging to my father's arm while photographers snapped pictures. A reporter approached them with a microphone. Mr. Blake, how do you respond to your daughter's allegations of fraud and attempted murder? My father's response was exactly what I expected, no comment. This is a family matter that's been blown out of proportion. Even facing criminal charges, he couldn't acknowledge what they'd done. Rebecca pulled me aside before I could be cornered by reporters. Savannah, this is just the beginning. The criminal investigation could take months, and they'll likely face multiple charges. Insurance fraud, theft, conspiracy, maybe even attempted murder depending on how the DA interprets those text messages about your accident. What does that mean for me? It means you're going to be testifying again, probably multiple times. It means your life is going to be scrutinized publicly. And it means your parents are probably going to prison. The weight of that hit me harder than I expected. Despite everything they'd done, despite the calculated cruelty of their actions, they were still the people who'd raised me. Watching them face criminal charges felt both satisfying and devastating. Over the next few weeks, the story exploded across social media and local news. The headline, "Tech Millionaire Exposes Parents' Murder Plot in Court," was clickbait gold, and everyone had opinions about my situation. The responses were surprisingly polarized. About 60% of people supported me completely, calling my parents monsters and praising my courage in exposing them. But 40% thought I was a cold-hearted daughter who'd destroyed my family over money. Blood is thicker than water, one Facebook comment read. No matter what they did, those are your parents. You could have worked it out privately instead of humiliating them publicly. Those comments stung more than I expected. Even with overwhelming evidence of fraud and manipulation, some people still believed I owed my parents unconditional loyalty simply because they'd raised me. But the support outweighed the criticism. I received hundreds of messages from other people who'd experienced financial abuse from family members, thanking me for speaking out and inspiring them to seek their own justice. One message particularly stayed with me. My sister stole my inheritance when our grandmother died, and I've spent 5 years feeling guilty for being angry about it because family forgives family. Watching you stand up for yourself in court gave me the courage to file my own lawsuit. Thank you for showing me that protecting yourself isn't betrayal. The criminal charges came 3 weeks after the civil trial. The district attorney, clearly motivated by the public attention the case had received, announced a comprehensive investigation into my parents' activities. They were ultimately charged with insurance fraud, theft, conspiracy, and elder financial abuse, the last charge being applicable because they'd defrauded my biological parents' estate, which was considered elder abuse even though the victims were deceased. The attempted murder charges didn't stick. While their text messages about my potential accidents were certainly suspicious, the DA couldn't prove concrete intent to harm me. But the other charges were rock solid. My parents' attorney tried to negotiate a plea deal, but I'd made it clear through Rebecca that I wanted full prosecution. They'd spent years systematically exploiting me. Now they could face the full consequences of their choices. The financial restitution proved impossible for them to pay. They'd spent the money from my trust fund over the years and had no liquid assets that could cover $650,000. Their house went into foreclosure, their retirement accounts were seized, and they faced bankruptcy on top of criminal charges. 3 months after the trial, I received a letter forwarded through Rebecca's office. My mother's handwriting, shaky and desperate. Savannah, I know you probably won't read this, but I need you to know that we do love you. We made terrible decisions, but we never meant for things to go this far. Your father is talking about taking his own life, and I don't know how to help him anymore. We've lost everything, our house, our retirement, our reputation, our daughter. I'm not asking for forgiveness, because I know we don't deserve it. I just wanted you to know that despite everything that's happened, despite all the lies and mistakes, the love we felt for you is real. That was never part of the scheme. I read the letter 3 times, then put it in my filing cabinet without responding. Love might have been real, but love without respect, love without honesty, love that comes with conditions and expectations and life insurance policies, that's not love worth preserving. They'd made their choices. They'd calculated the risks and decided I was worth more to them as an asset than as a daughter. Now they were learning what happens when your assets decide to fight back. The hardest part wasn't the public scrutiny or the criminal proceedings or even the emotional devastation of losing my family. The hardest part was realizing that I felt relieved. For the first time in my adult life, I wasn't carrying the weight of their expectations, their financial demands, their emotional manipulation. I was free to build relationships based on mutual respect rather than obligation. I was free to be successful without feeling guilty. I was free to be myself without owing anyone an explanation. And that freedom, purchased with pain and paid for with the destruction of everything I'd believed about my family, was worth every difficult moment in that courtroom. 6 months later, I stood in the conference room of my expanded office space, looking out at the team I'd built around my growing business. Elena had joined as my chief financial officer, bringing her forensic accounting expertise to help other entrepreneurs protect themselves from financial predators. Dr. Chen had become a consultant, helping us identify and assist business owners dealing with family-based financial abuse. The irony wasn't lost on me. My parents' attempt to destroy my success had actually catalyzed the biggest growth period in my company's history. The media attention from the trial, rather than damaging my reputation, had brought me dozens of new clients. Entrepreneurs who'd read about my situation reached out, either seeking protection from their own potentially exploitative family members or simply wanting to work with someone who'd proven she could handle extreme pressure with grace and strategic thinking. Digital Horizons had grown from a small consulting firm to a comprehensive business protection service, offering everything from cybersecurity to family financial planning. We'd hired 12 new employees and were considering opening a second office. But the professional success, gratifying as it was, paled in comparison to the personal growth I'd experienced. The criminal trial had concluded 2 weeks earlier. My parents pled guilty to multiple charges and were sentenced to 3 years in prison, with the possibility of early release after 18 months with good behavior. They'd also been ordered to pay full restitution, though everyone involved understood they'd never be financially capable of repaying what they'd stolen. I didn't attend the sentencing hearing. Rebecca had asked if I wanted to deliver a victim impact statement, but I declined. I'd said everything I needed to say in that civil courtroom 6 months earlier. Instead, I'd spent that day having brunch with Elena and my new chosen family, a group of friends and colleagues who'd supported me through the worst period of my life and celebrated with me as I rebuilt something better. Do you ever regret it? Elena asked over mimosas. Going public with everything, I mean. You could have settled quietly and avoided all the media attention. I considered the question seriously. The past 6 months had been intense. Journalists calling, social media commentary, strangers approaching me in coffee shops to share their own family drama stories. My private life had become very public, and that came with costs. But it also came with unexpected benefits. You know what I've learned? I said, setting down my glass. Keeping family secrets only protects the people who are doing wrong. When I was suffering in silence, trying to figure out why my parents were becoming increasingly demanding and manipulative, I felt isolated and confused. But when I told the truth publicly, I discovered that family financial abuse is incredibly common. Hundreds of people reached out to share similar experiences. That was perhaps the most valuable outcome of the entire ordeal. I'd started an online support group for people dealing with financial exploitation by family members, and it had grown to over 3,000 members worldwide. The stories people shared were heartbreaking but also empowering. Children whose parents had stolen their college funds, siblings who'd been manipulated into providing endless financial support, elderly relatives whose adult children had drained their retirement accounts. My situation had been extreme, but the underlying dynamic was depressingly common. Family members using guilt, obligation, and emotional manipulation to exploit their relatives financially. I've been thinking about writing a book, I admitted to Elena. Not just about my experience, but about the broader issue of family financial abuse. How to recognize it, how to protect yourself, how to break free from the guilt that keeps people trapped. Elena grinned. I love that idea. And I know exactly who should write the foreword, Judge Williams. She's been following your support group and mentioned that she sees these cases all the time but rarely with such clear documentation. The mention of Judge Williams reminded me of something that had happened the previous week. I'd received a formal invitation to speak at a conference for family court judges, sharing my experience as a way to help them better recognize and address financial abuse cases. The scared young woman who'd walked into that courtroom 6 months ago would never have imagined standing up in front of legal professionals to discuss her traumatic experience. But trauma, I'd learned, could either break you or forge you into something stronger. I'd chosen to be forged. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus, the private investigator who'd helped expose my parents' scheme. He'd become a friend over the months, someone who understood the complicated feelings that came with discovering that the people closest to you had been systematically deceiving you. Saw the news about the Digital Horizons expansion. Drinks to celebrate. I smiled, typing back quickly. Absolutely. Bring Sarah if she's free. Dr. Chin had become another unlikely friend, someone whose professional expertise in psychological manipulation had helped me process the emotional aftermath of my family's betrayal. As I looked around the brunch table at Elena and thought about the broader network of support I'd built over the past 6 months, I realized something profound had shifted in my understanding of family. I'd spent 28 years believing that family meant the people who shared your blood or legal documents. But real family, I discovered, meant the people who supported your growth, celebrated your success, and stood by you when life became complicated. Real family didn't come with conditions or hidden agendas. Real family didn't calculate your value based on your net worth or take out insurance policies betting on your death. Real family loved you for who you were, not what you could provide. The Blakes had never been my real family. They'd been custodians who'd mistaken ownership for love, who'd seen potential for exploitation where they should have seen a daughter to nurture and protect. But Elena, Marcus, Dr. Chin, Rebecca, and the growing network of people in my life who'd chosen to support and care for me, they were family in every way that mattered. My phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. Rebecca's name appeared on the screen. "Savannah, I hope I'm not bothering you, but I wanted you to know. I just got word that your parents are requesting a meeting. They want to apologize and discuss the possibility of reconciliation." I felt a familiar knot form in my stomach, the old conditioning trying to reassert itself. Part of me, the scared little girl who'd spent decades trying to earn their approval, wanted to believe that reconciliation was possible. But the stronger part of me, the woman who'd fought for her freedom and won, knew better. "Rebecca, please tell their attorney that I'm not interested in any form of contact or reconciliation. They made their choices, and I've made mine." "Are you sure?" This could be genuine remorse on their part. I thought about my mother's letter, about her claim that the love had been real even if everything else was a lie. Maybe she was telling the truth. Maybe they did feel genuine remorse for what they'd done. But remorse doesn't undo fraud. Apologies don't resurrect trust that's been systematically destroyed. And love that comes with insurance policies and discussions of convenient accidents isn't love worth preserving. "I'm sure," I said firmly. "My family is here with me now, and they're all the family I need." After hanging up, I looked around the table at Elena, who was arguing with our friend David about the best strategy for our upcoming product launch, and I felt something I'd never experienced with the Blakes. Complete, unconditional acceptance. These people loved me for who I was, not what I could give them. They celebrated my success without calculating their share. They supported me through difficulties without keeping score of what I owed them. This was what family was supposed to feel like. As we prepared to leave brunch, Elena linked her arm through mine. "So, what's next for the unstoppable Savannah Blake?" I thought about the business expansion, the book I wanted to write, the support group that was helping people around the world break free from family financial abuse, and the life I was building surrounded by people who genuinely cared about my well-being. "Everything," I said, smiling. "Absolutely everything." Because when you stop owing your existence to people who never deserved your gratitude, when you stop carrying guilt that was never yours to bear, when you finally understand that you don't have to earn love through sacrifice and financial support, suddenly, anything becomes possible. The Blakes had tried to steal my future, but instead, they'd freed me to create something better than they ever could have imagined. And that, more than any court victory or financial restitution, was the sweetest justice of all. Looking back on this journey, I can't help but wonder, have you ever questioned whether family loyalty is worth preserving when that family is systematically destroying you? Sometimes the people who claim to love us most are actually our biggest obstacles to happiness and success. If you've experienced anything similar to my story, or if you know someone trapped in a cycle of family financial abuse, please share this video and let them know they're not alone. Hit that like button if you believe that protecting yourself isn't betrayal. Subscribe for more stories about finding strength in impossible situations, and drop a comment sharing your own experiences with family dynamics, good or bad. Your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear to find their own courage. Thank you for listening to my family revenge story, and remember, sometimes the greatest act of love is refusing to enable someone else's toxic behavior. May you find the strength to choose your own well-being over other people's expectations, and may justice find its way to everyone who needs it.